Duric from University of Banja Luka announced her missing from this presentation. So I invite now Miss Caroline Ledant from Schola Campesina in Italy, Europe. Please.
Okay. Hello.
Okay,
I'm
thank
here.
you.
I am trying to share my screen. Okay, it's done. So I am Caroline Ledant. I am from this Schola Campesina organization. We are based in Italy and we focus mainly our activities on the global governance of food and agriculture. So today I will speak about the political aspect of seeds, let's say, but under the treaty, because there are so many things to say on the political aspect of seeds. I will present you this treaty, so the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, which has this very important article on farmers' rights. So it's really the recognition of the rights of food producers to their seeds, to conserve their seeds, to sell them, to exchange. So it's not a small issue regarding biodiversity. And it has been said before by other speakers. So agricultural biodiversity, as we know it today, it has been a very long process done by food producers all along the years and along the history, which identify interesting characteristics in plants and animals to reproduce them and get better yields and more tasty food and so on. I think Dr. Joshi made a very exhaustive list of these characteristics that can be reproduced by food producers. And it's a very, very rich agricultural biodiversity that we have today. And as you have seen, it's threatened. Oh. I'm trying to switch slides. Okay, this way. So yeah, it's today threatened, and it's actually a very important issue which deserves much more political attention. It's not only about environment, it's also about the legacy that we give to next generations, and it's about our culture, and it's a huge issue which is much broader than just an environmental interest. So the treaty, International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, it has been endorsed in 2001, entered into force in 2004 by FAO conference, and it has been a very long struggle of more than 20 years from civil society organization and social movement, farmers organization, to defend the right of farmers to preserve and using and exchanging and selling their seeds. So at the very end, at the end of these 20 years, okay, we got this interesting international instrument, but unfortunately, there is a lack of implementation at national level, and we will see it later. It's a pity regarding all these efforts and all these negotiations and conversation among states to find the right instruments and the benefit sharing on the genetic resources. We will talk about this later. So the treaty is potentially a very good instrument to save and to protect biodiversity. It's obvious that the agricultural biodiversity will be well defended if the treaty could have been applied or would be applied. But it's also the case for the wild biodiversity, as we have seen also by previous speakers, that the protection of habitats is really an issue, and protecting small-scale food production is also protecting habitats and just preserving wild biodiversity regarding monoculture and large-scale production, which goes beyond, which goes along habitat destruction, like deforestation and so on. So the treaty is, when we speak about the nexus between this treaty and biodiversity, it's obvious that at the center we have the food producers. And because farmers do rely on biodiversity for their production, for their livelihoods, but they are also the main agent, as I mentioned it before. So, for example, let's take an example, but the speakers previously have been talking about this also, that if you have a field of corn planted by industrial seeds and without peasant knowledge involved, the individuals are genetically exactly the same. And by the way, it requires also chemicals. They have been designed to receive chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers. But on the contrary, in most of small-scale farmers' gardens, individuals have very great intra-variety, biodiversity within the species and heterogeneity. So we gain, this is easy to understand, I think. And this has been recognized by the treaty. So the important role of food producers in this dynamic management of the cultivated plants. So it's a huge improvement, let's say, on the side of the recognition, the symbolic recognition. I like this quote because it's saying about the future, and that seeds really represent the past that we have, and it's a legacy for the present and the future. So it's a quote from La Via Campesina, the main food producers union. I would like also to highlight the fact that the recognition of this role of food producers is protecting food producers in their activities of maintaining and developing biodiversity. And doing so, it also protects us as consumers, as a population, through the right to food. And this is not always obvious to see the link between biodiversity and food producers' maintenance of biodiversity and the right to food. So the fact that there is a multiplicity, hopefully we still have a very large basis of food producers around the world. The fact that there are so many people farming is a guarantee of the right to food to be applied. Imagine if we had just 1, 2, or 3 companies providing food for everyone, we would have food security, but we would be very worried and concerned about the food provision. So it's the farmers that feed us, they are also the ones that maintain the agricultural biodiversity and that guarantee this right to food. And at the same time, they are really poorly supported by food policies, by policies in general, sorry. And the treaty, as well as the newly adopted instrument of the United Nations, UNDROP, United Nations Declaration on the Right of Peasants and Other People Living in Rural Area, as well as the CBD, the Nagoya Protocol, and so on, are very interesting instrument to protect their activities and our right to food. I will now stop talking for 2 minutes. I would like you to hear from a farmer woman from Zimbabwe, from ZIMSOF organization. So ZIMSOF is an organization of food producers in Zimbabwe, organizing seed fair and so on. And I think it would be interesting to have her voice on this issue.
As a woman, I have to ensure there is enough food for my family, food that is nutritious and wholesome. I don't buy seeds from the shops. I am a strong believer in farm seed.
I am sorry, this is my fault.
I'm a strong believer in farm seed that we have selected and they used for a long time. Our selection methods depend on various factors, such as resistance to drought and the reliance to the crops despite the poor rains. Some crops we grow for the various reasons, or composite use. For example, we grow certain kinds of beans in order to have relish. In relish, we use the leaves of the beans. And the beans itself, we use it as food. The crops we grow are a result of years of in situ experiments that have handed results and have been proved reliable over the past generations. Our organization is trying to revive these crops and has embarked on to encourage farmers to collect and produce these forgotten crops.
I hope you could hear it. Thank you for being patient and hearing to Sukolule. I think it's important to have this kind of wisdom and from a farmer woman, that she's starting her speech saying, as a woman, I am responsible for the nutrition. I don't remember exactly, but to give nutritious food to my family. And this is the case of many, many women around the world being carried of this task of feeding the family in a nutritious way. I want to highlight it here because the role of women in the international instruments and literacy is always it's always present, because now gender issues are always there, but usually as a chapter or as a endnote. And when we speak about biodiversity and right to food, the role of women is extremely important and should be acknowledged as central. Okay, so this was the point of this slide. Now going back to farmers' rights, I will put it maybe bigger, yeah. So as I said, this article in the treaty is the recognition of the importance of the dynamic management of biodiversity by food producers. So it's a reference that can be of great utility when speaking with governments and weekend advocacy, as well as for food producers themselves to be at the end acknowledged in this important role and being proud of it. Okay, this has been said. Just a word on the context. So when negotiating this treaty, there were a huge attempt from the seed companies to defend their so-called rights, of the genetic materials that they discovered. Actually, they just have the technology to extract genetic material and to make profit out of it. And in this context, social movement, farmers organization gathered and said, okay, we need also to defend our rights. So this is why they created this concept of farmers' rights to seed. But in a normal world, if this attempt from seed companies were not existing, then this concept would not exist neither. It's really to face this attack and to defend their rights as it was threatened. I will not go in deep in the article, just to mention that Article 9.2 that saying that it's the national governments that are responsible for the application of the treaty, and this is really part of the problem, because it's the treaty being binding, it's not implemented, and so it's important on the symbolic aspect, but it's really poorly implemented so far. This is why I put this quote. It's really an important aspect when dealing with the treaty. The seed industry could benefit of the treaty because they had more easily access to these resources, but the benefit sharing never happened. There are no payment for this genetic material extracted from the south, and the national government do not apply what is in this treaty and regarding farmers' rights. So it's also mentioned here that there is a work done to improve its functioning, but 5 years later, when they published this article, there was no outcome of this negotiation, unfortunately. So biodiversity is really closely linked to the culture, and it created livelihoods for so many. It's closely linked to nutrition. It's also what is food producers do provide local markets out of the cultivated biodiversity that they maintain in their fields. And it's also closely linked to this dynamic at local level, to territories, to women's rights, as we mentioned it. And it's important heritage. Also, knowledge is at the center of biodiversity. I just had a report from Turkey with a 19 young guy wishing to farm and live in the city. He wanted to start farming, and he just went to the conventional farming because no knowledge was available. He was out of a farming family, and he was just wishing to start farming and being in a village. So without knowledge, it's really hard to be independent from the extension services that are provided, which are so often for the conventional farming, which do not foster biodiversity, nor wild, nor cultivated. And knowledge is really important in a mountain context everywhere, but here where the living condition is not easy, people are really relying on their knowledge to cultivate. And the role of women is also extremely important, holding an important part of this traditional knowledge and seeds. And so the traditional varieties are preserved because they are a source of nutrition, and they are well adapted to these conditions. I'm not an expert at all on the mountains. This is why I rely on this study here, because this is an online school about mountains. So I wanted to have this approach, but I will not speak too much because I'm not an expert on this. But it's clear here and elsewhere that adapted seeds, traditional varieties, and the process of adapting year by year the seeds in situ is really, really important in the context of climate change. And this is one of the current challenges that we face, as you know. It's obvious, but also another challenge is the disappearance of local knowledge. Here I personally live here now in France. My organization is based in Italy. I am originally from Belgium. And this part of the world, in the Western countries, local knowledge is not easy to find. And we lost a lot of knowledge. My grandmother was taught by her grandbrother how to grow food. Then she moved to the city after the war, the Second War. And then we lost the knowledge. This is the case for many, many families. But this threat is also happening in other parts of the world, as it has been also mentioned by a previous speaker. There is an enormous concentration, economical concentration, specifically in the seed sector. It's now really getting crazy. The mergers that we have in this sector, and this go hand with hand in hand with the digitalization of the economy, which really push for this concentration. And now companies are making profit not from the genetic material from the plant. Now they are using genetic material built on the computer. We are going in a very virtual world, which is also threatening local biodiversity. Now FAO is really taking this trend and pushing for more digitalization and high tech in agriculture, and we see it as very dangerous. This is from a report that is about to be published by FAO and our organization. In a few days, it will be available. It's on the monitoring system on the biodiversity in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And I take the opportunity of this conversation to say that we are making a list of monitoring systems of agricultural biodiversity. And it's obvious that it will not be exhaustive. We are trying to collect the initiatives. And so if you are aware of an initiative, we will have an online dynamic list, so it can be filled in during the coming month. And I'm happy to welcome new initiatives in this list. So coming back to I'm almost finished, huh? Don't worry. So the increasing economy activity based on genetic material really is bringing dangerous threats on biodiversity. And one of these threats is the commercialization of a set of super genes that, like a genetic material which is super interesting theoretically, but that could really damage local ecosystems if introduced. And that can lead to the generalization of this standard gene in many parts of the world. So this is an example of the risk held by the economic activity on the based on genetic materials. So the treaty, as well as the declaration of the UN on the right of peasants and other people living in the rural area, as well as the CBD and the Nagoya Protocol. They are all trying to regulate the use of genetic materials. But the digitalization is going so fast that so far there is no legal instrument to regulate the digitalization in agriculture. I will not go into detail in the UNDROP, but it's highly interesting. I want just to finish my presentation saying that seeds are a matter of human rights. The rights to use it, the right to exchange and to sell it is really threatened. And it's, let's say, a condition for biodiversity to be maintained and to be developed. So the policies are sometimes very in contradiction, no? Saying that we need to meet the SDGs to address the climate change, and at the same time not supporting farmers' rights. Human rights in agriculture is translated by the concept of food sovereignty, and agroecology is part of food sovereignty. Agroecology is really a way of cultivating, but based on food producers' knowledge, with a respectful way of dealing with nature, based on its own capacity to deal with its challenges. And it's, of course, a matter of autonomy, resilience, and of local biodiversity. I will finish my presentation here, so saying that biodiversity is a matter of human rights, and I'm welcoming any comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, for your presentation, your delicate, let's say, lobby for the national governments to apply the what the treaties, what the existing treaties are already mentioning, and for adapting the choice of seeds and cultures to local specificity, and to ensure the agricultural biodiversity. So thank you for your well-documented presentation. And now it's